All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the React Router DOM, or just the React Browser Router. There's a couple of different routers that we can use. Today's we're going to use Browser Router, and for the remainder of the course, we'll utilize Browser Router. Now the question is, what is React Router DOM, or why is it important to us, right? Well, we've created a lot of front-end applications so far that are single-page applications. They're all one single page that renders. It uses different components, and depending on the components, depending on some conditions, we change what's inside of those components to be able to render something on the screen. Now that's great, but whenever we create an actual site, we want to have the ability to actually change in between either to change their URLs in between browsers, right? They want to go into the browser and they want to type facebook.com/friends, and that should take them to all of their friends list, right? And just like that, we're also giving our users capabilities to save a tab on a browser or do whatever it is they need to change. So for example, if we go to React Bootstrap, for example, all right, if we go to Bootstrap, we can see that Bootstrap automatically, let me just go to React Bootstrap. So currently right now I'm at reactbootstrap.netlify.app. This is their URL, right? Well, as soon as I go to get started, it takes me to /docs/getting-started/introduction. And because of this URL, well, I can save it. And once I save it, anytime I go over to this URL again, it's going to render the same exact components. Well, that's not a capability that we currently have in our project, or that we haven't covered in our projects just yet. So that's what we'll be talking about today: how to utilize the React Router DOM in order to create routing capabilities for the user. Does anyone have any questions about what we'll be covering today? Okay, if there are no questions, then let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to have to create a Vite and React environment. So can anyone walk me through the process of creating a new Vite project?
npm create Vite.
npm create Vite. All right, it's going to ask me for a Vite project name. So I'm just going to name it router demo. Now what?
Use React.
Right.
And JavaScript.
Perfect. So now I have my router demo. What's the next part that I need to do?
Just follow the prompts.
Follow the prompts. All right. So we're going to change directory into router demo. I'm going to run npm install. What's npm install going to do?
It'll give you like your package JSON.
Well, it seems like I already have a package.json.
Whoops.
But
node modules.
Oh yeah, it's going to create node modules, right? But the command npm install is definitely going to look somewhere inside of package.json. Where is it going to look at in order to know what it needs to install?
Your build.
My what?
I said scripts.
And I said your build.
Okay, nice. So whenever we run npm install, scripts are things that we run on the terminal, right? These are commands that we're creating shortcuts for that would run whenever I run the npm package run. So I could say npm run dev, and that would run my development server, npm run build, and that would run my build. These are all commands that I created. They are aliases in scripts. So when I run npm install, it wouldn't look at my aliases to find the packages that it needs to install, right? Instead, what it would look like is it would go into dependencies, and it would look at dev dependencies to know that it needs to install all of the requirements in both of these sections. And that's how it's going to install my React project, right? So I run npm install. It starts looking inside of my dev dependencies. We can see here it has the ESLint plugins, which we can see that is coming here from my dev dependencies. And once all of that's installed, just like someone previously mentioned, my node modules directory was created and a package lock JSON was created. What's the difference between package JSON and package lock JSON?
Package lock JSON is when other people are like other devs are in their project, it tells them what dependencies they need to be in your project.
Okay, yeah, that's close. So the package JSON, right, handles the, I guess, like the header titles of the dependencies that we want to actually install. But the package lock JSON is where it grabs every single one of those dependencies and it in detail describes what exactly it is that it installed. But the main key thing to remember about these two is that we will interact with package JSON, but we will never directly interact with package lock JSON unless it's a very specific scenario. All right, so now I did that, and now I want to run my server. Well, it looks like to run my server, I just run npm run dev. Okay, now that I run npm run dev, I can open up my browser, and there is my Vite and React application. Okay, great. Now I want to clean this up so that none of this information is actually here, none of the CSS is there, and that when I console.log something into the terminal, it only shows up once instead of twice, right? I only wanted to show me the effects of my application once, and I do not want it to show it upon mounting and dismounting. So what things do I need to change in what files in order to accomplish that task?
Go to your main and get rid of the strict.
All right, so go to Main.jsx. Here's strict mode. I'm saying to get rid of it, so I will get rid of strict mode. All right, strict mode is now gone. Now what?
You can clear out your CSS files, index and app.
All right. So index is gone, and app CSS is gone. What's next?
And then in App.jsx, you can clear out what's between the fragmented tags and the counter button. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, great. And then I'm just going to put an H1 of our classical hello Victor. All right. So now we have a React application. It has no errors, and currently it has nothing that I'm not utilizing, right? My project is now clean and it has exactly what I needed to do. And I'm able to understand the folder structure of what's going on. Great. At this point, does anyone have any questions on setting up your Vite and React development project? All right. What is the key difference between package lock JSON and package JSON?
You don't touch the lock one.
Perfect. It's locked, right? We don't directly interact with package lock JSON, and we do interact with package JSON. Fantastic. All right. So now we have all this information installed. We're all ready to go. But currently, right now, I am only looking at one page. What if I wanted to see something like /about? What would happen if I run that? Well, even if I run /about, Vite doesn't know what to do with this. So it just takes me to my local host 5173, renders my app, and then disregards the remainder of this application. It doesn't know what to do. It has no routing capabilities. It doesn't even throw an error, right? I can type in whatever I want. And if I go to it, it's just going to say, okay, well, you want something at local host. This is what's rendering on it. And it has no idea about anything to the right of my HTTP, right? So the request gets sent to my local host for 5173. That request gets accomplished. And then all of this right here on the right side just gets thrown away. Doesn't know what to do with it, doesn't know it exists, and it has no routing capability. So now we're going to actually talk about how to add our routing capabilities. We're going to utilize something called the React Router DOM. Now, React Router DOM It's just a library that's supposed to give us the capabilities to actually have some routing. So let's see if I can pull it up here. So React router. There it is. All right, so we can go into the React router DOM. It gives us some information about the different routers that it has. It has a browser router, memory router. It has a couple of other ones. And then it gives us a little bit of information on how to create these routers. So let's actually start applying some of this information. The first thing that we need to do is actually install the browser router. Now we're utilizing NPM and we're inside of a Vite development project. So how could I install a package? What command do I need to run in order to install a new package into my package.json?
npm install.
Okay, so I run npm install, and then it's going to say, well, what is it that I want it to install? I'm going to want it that I want to install React-router-DOM. Okay, so now I have React Router DOM installed. It tells me it installed 3 packages. I can go into my package.json to confirm. And now we can see that under dependencies, I have the React Router DOM version 6.18. So I know my install was successful. Currently, if I look at my terminal, I'm getting a bunch of errors saying error connection refused. Why is that? Where's this error coming from?
Your server's not running?
Yeah, my server's not running, so it's telling me, hey, since the server's not running, there is no connection right now. I have no idea what to do. And as soon as I run my development server, the connection gets established once again, and everything's good to go. All right. So now I have a router, and I have this information called Hello Victor. Well, so far we've covered something called components, but today we're going to cover a new folder named Pages. And within Pages, I'm just going to create a file named homepage.jsx. Now, this is just a naming convention. It doesn't change anything fundamentally. There's no difference between a component and a page. It's only a naming fundamental for me, right? I know that these are going to be pages, and that within these pages, I'm going to render components. And if I had any components, I would put them within a component folder inside of their own files. And then I would just call those components within homepage.jsx. Well, in homepage, I'm just going to create the function called homepage. And all of this is going to return it's going to return simple HTML, H1. It's going to say home. This is all I want homepage to do. And now I want to be able to utilize this homepage component within App.jsx. How could I do that?
You have to export homepage and then import it in your App.jsx.
Okay, great. How do I export it?
Export default homepage.
All right, so we're going to use the default method. And just to make sure that I understand, what's the difference between doing export default homepage and just running export const homepage?
For the default, you can only have one default export. If you do the other kind, you can have multiple, but you have to be very specific about what you name it when you import it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fantastic. So if I do export in this case, and then I call a function immediately to the right, I can have multiple export functions, and then multiples could be exported from the same file. When I do export default, on the other hand, I can only export one function from within this file. So currently I'm exporting homepage, and now I want to utilize it within App.jsx. How can I do that?
Import homepage from .pages/homepage.jsx with a path.
Nice. Okay, so here we have import homepage, which is the name of the function. not the file, from this directory within pages. So it goes inside of the pages directory. And then it finds homepage, the file name. And that's where it grabs my function from. Okay, great. And now how do I get it to render here on the screen?
Run your app function,
No, what do you mean by that?
or like call the app function.
I see. So you're saying to call the actual page by doing something like this. Okay, and now we can see that home is rendering on my screen, right? I created a homepage page that says home. I exported it through default methods, then imported it here on App.jsx and rendered the homepage. Well, that's great. But this isn't exactly working how I wanted to, right? Because what I would want to do is have something that says, hey, you will only render homepage if I am currently at / homepage. Nope. Can't do that. There you go. Only render homepage if I'm currently in local host 5173 / right? That's the only time that homepage should render. But currently right now, I can do / whatever, and it would still just render my homepage. So that's a problem. So let's fix that. We're gonna now actually utilize the browser router that we created. Within the same level of App.jsx, I'm going to create a new file named router.jsx. And within this router, I'm going to import create router. Create, oh no. Create browser router from React router DOM. Okay, so that's going to import the create browser router function. And now I'm just gonna create a router. So I'm gonna say, hey, I'm going to create this router. And I want this router to be equal to or hold the value of create browser router. And then create browser router is essentially just a function. And this function takes in an array of the different routers that I would like to create or the different paths. And the way I tell it what I'm going to create is I open up a dictionary for every router that I want to render. Now, inside of this dictionary, I can specify what is it that I want it to do. And before I keep moving on here, does anyone have any questions about the folder structure that we have so far, or how our React application is looking up to this point?
A small question.
Of course.
We need all 3 brackets for this.
As in parentheses, square brackets, and then curly brackets?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. So this parentheses at the end is calling the function, and then the function takes in an array because it needs to be something that's iterable that gets passed into the function. So I have to pass in an array, and then that array is supposed to hold objects within it. So that's why we have this objects inside. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? Okay, let's continue pushing forward then. So now I can finally go ahead and specify a couple of things. So I can tell it, I want you to render this one element upon an empty path. So at /, this is where this element is going to render. And the element that I want to render is going to be my app. I want to render my entire app.jsx whenever I am in a /. Okay. Now, my app is going to have children, meaning that following this slash, there will be children. And in this case, before I add any specific path, I want to make sure that my homepage is the first thing that renders when my app renders. So I'm going to add an index attribute. And this index attribute is either true or false. So I'm going to set it to true. Oh, what's going on here? Oh, this is supposed to be a dictionary. Sorry, again, we're inside of an array of objects, right? So I open up the children. The children has to take in an array because it has to be an iterable class. So we pass in an array, and then we pass in this array more objects, specifying the children that fall within the element of app. And then finally, we tell it the element that it's going to render. And in this case, what I want to render is homepage. So now I imported app, I imported homepage, everything has been created, but I'm still not using this router. I'm going to want to use this router inside of App.jsx, or I'm going to need a way to connect them both. So what do I need to do in order to export this router or grab this router in another file?
Export default router
Nice.
or create browser.
Yeah, so I'm going to export default router. And remember, create browser router is a function, right? A function that will have a return statement. So whatever is returned from this function is being saved within the router constant. So now we're exporting this router. But now I want to connect this router somehow to my App.jsx or to give it some value within my App.jsx, right? Well, how can I do that? Right? I created this router, and this router needs to interact with something. And it can't be app because I'm importing app into it, right? And if we remember from Python, we have this circular imports problem. So if it can't be app, and it's something that's supposed to talk to my main browser, what other file interacts with index.html to render the app onto the browser?
Index.jsx.
I don't have an index.jsx.
I mean, main. Sorry, main.
Yeah, so I can go to main.jsx, and inside of main.jsx, we can see that I'm calling the app function. But that's not what I want. Instead, I actually want to give it a router. So since I want to give a router to main.jsx, I need to import router provider from React router DOM. And by doing that, I can then say that what I want to do here is not render app, but instead I want you to grab a router provider. I'm telling you, this is going to be the router that you'll use. This router provider takes in one attribute where it's going to say, okay, what is it that you want me to add in there? Sorry, not an attribute, a prop, right? It takes in one prop. So what should be in here? If this is my router provider and it takes in a prop named router, what should I be passing in here?
The router we just created.
Yeah, the router we just created. So now I'm just going to specify router, and that's going to bring in my router constant from router.jsx. Okay, great. So now that already knows that by doing this, it's going to go to router. Immediately when it renders this application, it goes to the router provider and it says, oh, we're supposed to have a React router DOM. So it goes to React router DOM and it goes to the router. And it says, hey, here inside of the router, we're creating a browser router. And at the empty path, I want you to render app. So that's what it's doing. Well, now let's see what happens if we put in a bunch of gibberish. Well, now if we put in a bunch of gibberish, we actually have some sort of functionality. right? It's saying, hey, you have an unexpected application error and you have a 404 not found. This isn't working correctly. This isn't what you're supposed to be doing. Okay. Well, yeah, this is okay, right? That's what I wanted. I now have the functionality to actually put a slash, and if I put a slash, it still renders my application because it goes to 5173. I could probably do it like this. So this is the same thing as saying HTTP / localhost 5173 / right? Because we're specifying this final slash. So that's where it's always going. So then it goes to my app and it renders the app, right? And then it renders the home page. So now I wonder what happens if I take off this home page from line 9. Well, now homepage is gone, right? It's not rendering. But if I look at my router, in my router, I'm telling it, hey, in this index, I want you to render the actual homepage. So there's something going on. This isn't fully connected yet. Although my router is exhibiting App.jsx, App.jsx is supposed to automatically render this homepage because it's at the index element, right? So what could I be missing here? And I don't expect anyone to know because it's the first time we were learning about this. But now what we're missing is something called an outlet. We created the link between our router and Main.jsx, which allows us to have router functionality, but we didn't create the link between app and the children of app. So now the children need to have a connection to app. So here's where we actually need to import outlet from React Router DOM. And instead of returning all of this information here of H1 elements, we could just return, or returning the home page here, we could just return outlet. And by doing that, the breakdown happens again, right? So this page gets rendered. User goes to localhost 5173. The first thing that gets accessed is index.html. So index.html starts rendering. It tells the browser, hey, I'm an HTML document. I'm going to be in the language of English. Here's the keyboard character set that you will be utilizing. It gives it an icon, a reactive viewport tag, and then it gives it a title, which is what we see here, V plus React. All right, great. Then it goes into the division of root, which we can see here. All right, if we go to elements, we can see the division of root. And then it tells it that at the bottom, it's going to run a script. It is a type module, and it's going to find it within the source directory in Main.jsx. So it goes to the source directory, goes to Main.jsx, and now within Main.jsx, it says, hey, I want you to grab the element by ID, which is root, and in root, I want you to render the following. And then it calls the router provider, which takes in a router, and we pass in the router that we created. So now let's take a look at our router. In the router that we created, we're telling the browser that at localhost 5173, it will render app.jsx. So it goes to app.jsx and renders hello Victor. This is coming from app.jsx, right? And then below hello Victor, we tell it to utilize the outlet component. So then once we pass in outlet, that reference back to the router, and it starts looking at the children to figure out which one of these children it's supposed to be communicating with. Well, we passed in this index true, which means every time app renders, at the same time app renders, you are going to render the following element at index, which is homepage. So then it goes to homepage, and in homepage, we get the H1 element of home. And that's how we get this React application to render. Does anyone have any questions over anything I just covered? Go ahead, Cody.
So for workflow, like to be efficient, you're starting a project. Would you want to like knock out all these pages first to like divvy up the different like piles that you're going to be putting CSS and other content in? Would you start with this?
That's what I would do. Yes, I would create my pages first, and then I would then create components. So we're talking more about project planning. I would start off thinking of what my site's going to look like, right? So I would divide my site into a couple of different sections. For simplicity's sake, let's say that it's 4, right? I wonder if there's a way to rotate this. Oh well. And then in these 4 sections, I would then draw out like what each page is going to look like, right? So I would have maybe an about page, a hello page, or maybe a product. Let's say this is an e-commerce website, right? And then the cart and the order confirmation after it's been sent. So I have these 4 pages. Well, in these 4 pages, I'm going to have a element that's going to be a navigation, and that's going to be constant against all 4. So just like that, I already know that I have to create 4 pages, and I have to create 1 component, which is my header component, right? And then I have to create a component that's maybe my greeting, right? Maybe it has some sort of animation or something special, and that falls inside of my first page. Then I have a component, or my page is going to render all of my items or my products, right? So maybe I have a tiny component, which is just cards for every product, kind of like we saw on Amazon. Okay, so after I select 1 cart item, I'm supposed to be able to see my cart. And maybe for this component, I have 1 component that renders my entire cart, and then I have a subcomponent that renders each individual item within the cart. And then maybe after checkout, I have a message that says, hey, thank you for your order, and then the order information right under. And each 2 of those is their own components. So just like that, I know that I have 1 component, which is my header. I have 1 component, which is my greeting, so that's 2. I have 1 component for each individual item. That's 3 components that I have to create now. I have a component for the cart itself, and then a component for each cart item, so that's 5 components. I have my congratulations message, which brings me to 6, and then my order summary, which is 7 separate components inside of 4 pages. And this is the way I would go to plan it out. And then once I have it drawn out and I know what I need, then I would go and create my folder structure so that I can then create my browser router. Does that answer your question, Cody? Of
Oh yeah, thank you.
course. Any other questions?
Can you demonstrate if your children have children pages?
If my children have children pages, are you talking about, so within the router?
Yes. So like your homepage, right?
Mhm.
Your homepage is a children of the main file, and then what if your homepage have children?
Yeah, so I can add a children component here. I could also make this an index be true. And then I can make the element. I always forget to wrap it inside of a dictionary. I mean, inside of an object. And then maybe I can have it be greeting. All right, and
Can
then
you add 2 elements, like 1 for greeting, 1 for big file?
Say again?
Can you add two children for that children? Like two
Uh,
elements?
I don't want to get into two elements yet, because that would go into the second portion of our lecture. But I will cover having sub-children.
Oh, okay, got you. Then, yeah.
Let's see, const, reading. Da-da-da. Okay, so if I try to do something like this, right, when I go to my console, it's going to tell me, hey, you cannot specify children on an index route. So I'm trying to pass in children to an element that's already an index. And it's telling me, hey, I can't do that. You can't make an index to something else that's already indexed, or this index element can't have children. Now, this children property belongs specifically to App.jsx. You do not want to put in more sub-children inside of other elements. If you're going to use something like this, right, instead of utilizing the element of children, what you should be doing is going to the homepage JSX and then passing in that component to show the greeting. Oh, wow, what did I mess up? Oh.
You have 2 periods in the import.
No, yeah, I did it right. Yeah, because it's got to go back one directory
Oh.
from pages and then go into components. Yeah. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, I may have asked wrongly. I think we're just, yeah, I'll wait for the next
The second portion,
yes.
of course.
Yes, yeah.
So I
Thanks.
see a question on the chat here that says, so outlet tells us where we want to render child routes. So when we go over to App.jsx, right, because our router tells us that we want to render, oh, let me close all of this noise, I apologize. So we have our router, and our router tells us that the one thing that it will render upon an MP path will be the App.jsx. But when we go to App.jsx, App.jsx needs to know a way to render the children, just like you mentioned, Andrew. So since it doesn't know about the children, we need to specify, hey, I want you to use this outlet component so that you can reference back to router.jsx and look within children so that you know what should be rendered and when to render it. Does that answer your question, Andrew? Essentially, the short answer to the question is yes.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. And I think, Robert, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question going back to like that, more so related to the picture you drew with all the different components in the project planning. I'm just curious, whenever you have multiple components like this, you know, like 6, 7 on one page, for example, like how do you go about like organizing your file structure so that those components stay organized? Are you creating like a folder for like that page and then creating the component files inside of it, or how do you normally do that?
That's a good question. Yeah, and there's a couple of ways of doing it, right? There's the way that you just mentioned, where you create pages, and then inside of pages, you have directories for each page, right? And then within each directory, it has all of its components and all of its pages. What I typically do is I just have 2 directories, one named components and one named pages. And then from there, because components are supposed to be reusable across all kinds of different pages, right? So I don't want to isolate them to one specific page. I just want them to fall within components. And then if I'm referencing something that's kind of odd, I always make sure to comment it within my pages so that it knows, hey, this is where you find this specific component and this is what it does. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. If there are no other questions, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and let's come back at 9:51 to do our small group outside or group breakout session. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their group breakout session. And let's go over the second portion of our lecture today. So far we've talked about the React Router DOM. We talked about when and why we want to use React Router DOM. We went over how to install it and how to connect it. Well, before we can start talking about browser router versus HashRouter, we need to actually talk about how to connect different pages to our browser router. Because currently, we only have one page. Well, let's go into the capabilities of our browser router. So far I have this greeting page, maybe, or this home page. Maybe I want to create a new page named About Me, right? Or the About page. So let's go ahead and add that. We're going to go ahead and say About page.jsx. And this is just going to create a function named About. And it's just going to return an h2 tag of About page. That way I know it's the actual About page that's showing up. I'm going to export the default page of About. Okay, so now I created the secondary page. And I want it to show up here whenever I say, hey, at 5173/about/, I want you to show me this About page. But currently I get this unexpected error. All right. And this is an unexpected error because it's saying, hey, we don't know about this URL. We're getting a 404 not found, right? There's a request being sent, and that request is coming back through with a 404 response. It doesn't find it. And if I look at my router, well, inside of my router, I don't have any paths for About. So I have to create that. Well, inside of this children component, because I know everything is being rendered through my app, I just want to add to my app another child. So I'm going to open up another object. I'm going to give it a path of About with a closing slash. And I'm going to give it an element of my About page. And now we can see that it is at localhost 5173 about. The error message is now gone. Where's this hello Victor coming from? Right, because if I go to
from
About page,
app.
yeah, great, awesome. Because my About page is only rendering About page. So this hello Victor is coming from App.jsx, right? Here's my header, h1 hello Victor. And now it goes into my outlet inside of my, which my outlet tells it to look at the router. And inside of my router, I'm telling it, hey, you have these children. These routes are available to the app. The route of About corresponds to the About page. And that's how we get it to render. Does anyone have any questions over this? Go ahead, Eric.
So when you're defining the children, whatever element you give with the index is true, that's going to be like the default page then, usually your home page, and then any like other pages you want with specific pathways, it's going to be with the path keyword, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So index will be what renders automatically at the same time that app renders at localhost 5173, and any other page will have to have a specific path. Go ahead, Kendra.
Why do we need a slash behind About?
It's a great question. So I wonder what happens if I take off the slash, right? And currently About does have a slash at the end. Well, when I look it up, everything works like if it's just perfectly normal. But what I can do is I can create some unexpected behavior if I have something chained that's like something along the path of, well, what if I want About slash, I don't know, maybe I have different membership types and it's About exclusive, right? And if it goes to About exclusive, then I wanted to render something. Well, I need to make sure that I include the slash so that I can differentiate between these two routes, because if I don't, then it's going to go into some naming problems. All right, so this is the general standard for naming conventions. Every time you declare a URL, you want to end it with a closing slash. Does that answer your question, Kendra?
Yes, thank you.
And then Frank, I believe you had your hand up as well.
I had the same question.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? Okay, good. So I just showed you guys an example of how I could connect an about page. Well, how could I connect a contact page? How would I go about creating something like that?
You make a contact.jsx page or file on your pages.
So contact page.jsx, okay.
Then you just add the path in your router.
Okay, so I go to my router. And then I create a path element. What would the path be?
So it'd be contact slash comma, and the elements would be contact and angle brackets.
Okay, getting an error. It's saying contact is not defined. Or maybe if I put contact page. Still can't find. Say again, Anna?
Import it.
We need to import it.
Okay. So import contact page. So let's say
And
import contact page. Where am I
Okay.
importing this from?
Pages slash contacts or contact page.
Okay, well, it says that contact page does not have an export default name.
So you have to export it.
What am I exporting?
You're exporting default contact page.
We need to create a function that's returning something on the page.
Got it. So I need to create the function contact page. And this is supposed to return a JSX component. So maybe we could return something like H2 and then set would be contact. Okay, so now we have our function. It's being exported. It gets connected to the router. The router is able to use it. How do I go to the contact page so I can view it through my URL?
/contact.
Yeah, great. So let's go 5173/contact. And now when I go, it renders hello Victor, and then it renders contact. Nice. Awesome. So everything's going on well. I have my routing. I have 3 pages that I've created, each one of them with separate content, and each one of them have their own path. So now I've created the ability to go to different pages in my front end application through different paths. But this isn't really practical, right? This isn't necessarily what I would want it to do. I would want to have something like a nav bar that has different links to the different endpoints that I want. Well, let's start talking about that. Let's start creating some navigations. So let's go over to App.jsx and let's create some navigation to these different routes. How can I do that?
Nav bar with
So someone said something about a nav tag. So let's add that.
Then within the nav tag, you could have another list.
Okay.
And then each list item would be a separate link. And those links could go to the about page, home, and contact page.
Okay. And each one of these should have an anchor tag, right?
Yes. Or like, I think there was actually a link tag also. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we will eventually use something like a link tag, but for now, we're gonna utilize the anchor tag. Let's go to about. Let's go to contact. I think currently we only have two. So let's say about. And then contact. Okay, so now I can click on about, can click on contact, and there's obviously the fantastic home. Right, so I can click home, that takes me to home, which also renders my greeting component. I can go to about, I can go to contact. Okay, so this works pretty well. But there's one issue when it comes to front-end development, right? I don't have a server, so I'm not able to save data until there's some sort of request that's working with some sort of database to actually save information. So if I want to save information in the front end, I need to be able to make sure that that information stays consistent, right? So if I say something like, hey, console.log, hello. When I run this, we see that it says hello on the terminal, right? But as soon as I click on contact, what just happened? What did we see my browser do?
Get rid of it.
Yeah, I got rid of it. And it got rid of it because it conducted an entire refresh, right? It didn't re-render. It didn't change the content on the screen. It literally did the same thing as if I were to say www dot or http whatever 5173 at contact, and then sent an entirely new request and refreshed the entire browser, meaning that it reset all of the information that I had in my front end. So that causes a problem because now the information that I want to stay constant for my user is going away. It's getting thrown away and it's getting restarted. So now, since we want things to stay the same, we want to utilize the link tag rather than utilizing the anchor tag. The anchor triggers an entire refresh in the browser, while the link tag just triggers a re-render, right? So it doesn't trigger a refresh of the browser, it triggers a re-render of the React DOM. So for example, here, when I say to, I want it to go to the simple home. We're going to see the link, right? And I could do the same for the other ones above. I mean, for the other ones below. I can change this to link, and then I can tell it I want you to go to about. But now I don't need the beginning slash at the beginning of my link tags because link directly works with React Router DOM. So it knows that it's going to take a look at the router that's being provided and find these routes. So now let's take a look here. I'm going to refresh my browser. My browser's empty. I say console.log, hello. Okay, so it says console.log hello. I can run it and it's going to tell me hello, and then it tells me that the function returns undefined. Okay, that's what I expect. But now when I click on home, notice my path is changing, but my browser itself didn't refresh, right? The information that I had in the front end is staying constant. Whereas before, when I had anchor tags, it was re-rendering my entire, not re-rendering, I apologize, it was refreshing my entire browser. Now, something important to know about link tags as well is that, yes, they are link tags for us. When we're using the code, we're using link tags. But what is this? Is this an HTML tag, or is this a component for React?
Component.
Yeah, this is a React component, right? So that means that there is a lot more code that's actually happening within that link tag that we don't necessarily need to have access to because it's doing that work for us. Well, what happens when I hover over this anchor tag of home? I mean, over this link tag of home. Well, if we take a look, the link tag is actually being interpreted as an anchor tag once it's being rendered on the browser. Right? So the change is the functionality, but superficially, once it's rendered on the browser, it's still just being rendered as an anchor tag. Now, it's important to emphasize this because in case you see a test suite that is asking you for 30 anchor tags, but you want to maintain information for whatever reason, maybe anchor tags, which will refresh the browser and get rid of all the information, aren't the right answer. Even though the test suite is saying that it's looking for an anchor tag, it's because once the link tag compiles, it is interpreted as an anchor tag. Okay. So again, what's the main difference between a link tag and an anchor tag?
An anchor tag is a actual what is it? HTML. Forgot what the name was. Header. However, the link tag is a React component that gets read as an anchor tag.
Yeah,
once it renders.
But what it functionally speaking, right? What's the difference between an anchor tag and a link tag in functional purposes?
The link tag doesn't cause the browser to refresh every time.
Perfect. So the link tag does not cause the browser to refresh. It causes the React router DOM to re-render. While it causes the React DOM to re-render. While an anchor tag causes an entire refresh on the site. Okay. So now I have my nav bar. I have some navigation so I can go over to different things. But now the question comes is, what if my user makes a mistake, right? My user's human. What if someone is trying to contact my user and they send them a link and they say, hey, go to this site, and then I want you to see the secret store, right? And they send it. Well, right now, secret store maybe is not supposed to exist, or maybe they created an error when they were supposed to go to the link. Maybe they put an extra E somewhere. And now they're getting this unexpected application, right? Or what if they just wanted to see our about page, but they accidentally went and they put an extra A at the end, right? So they go about. Well, now they get this unexpected application error and they have no way to go to my actual site or get re-rendered anyway. So now let's handle that. Let's handle the user error, right? Because anything that we do, we always want to assume that the user is more than likely going to do something that they're not supposed to do. And we have to handle those cases. Well, React Router DOM knows that we want to handle those cases. So it has an error element. So here within this children is set to an attribute of the parent object belonging to app. Well, we want our app to also have an attribute for an error element so that it knows how to handle it. So at the end of children, which is at the closing of my array, I'm going to make a new key named error element. And here it's just looking for a page. So not found page. This is what I want you to render whenever something is not found. Right, and right now my console is going to tell me, hey, this doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's true. I haven't created it yet. I'm simply going to go into my pages, make a new file called notfoundpage.jsx. And there I'm going to make a function saying not found page. And that function will return an h1 of this URL doesn't exist. And actually, And then right after that, I'm going to use a link tag to send the user back home. And then I'm just going to name it home. So finally, I will export default not found. All right, so this is what it'll be exporting. And this is what my user will see when they go to the wrong page. Currently, it's still not rendering correctly. If I refresh it, it's still going to tell me that not found page does not exist. Well, in my router, I'm telling it not found page is here, and the error element is there. So I'm passing all the attributes properly, and I'm exporting by default. But I'm still missing something. What could I be missing? Why would it tell me that not found page is not defined?
You have to import it still.
Yeah, even though I created this and I named it, it didn't import it, right? If I check my imports, it doesn't know about not found page. So I have to import not found page, and now it's able to find it. So now we see there's no routes that matched about. It tells me this URL doesn't exist. I can click home. And now anything that I put in there. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Hello. So now anything that I place in here after 5173 will always take me to this URL doesn't exist, because it's rendering the app and it knows that the app only has these children. Anything outside of these children will trigger the not found page, allowing the user to go back to my home, see about page, and the contact page. Does anyone have any questions over this?
Is there a way to still show the main menu on the not found page?
To still show the main menu?
Or would you have,
main menu. By main menu, do you mean?
so in App.jsx, I think you have the nav bar.
Yeah, it's a good question. So let's go ahead and create a component here.
Like why isn't it replaced? Like my question is, why does it not replace the outlet? Why does it replace the entire App.jsx?
Got it. Okay, so we could just create this into a component and have it, but I get what your question is now. I apologize. So your question is saying, well, in outlet, whenever I go to home, it shows me the home. Whenever I go to about, it shows me the about, but I'm still able to see my H1 tag, and I'm able to see my nav bar still rendering. But the moment I trigger my not found page, all of it goes away. It doesn't show me my regular app. It doesn't show me my nav bar. It just automatically renders that error element. Well, that's because error element is not a child, right? A child is essentially saying, here's App.jsx. And let me see if I can change this so that it's, no, you're gonna have to open it. There you go. Okay, so a child is saying, here's App.jsx. And a child of App.jsx is about. All right. So about page is a child of App.jsx. Home page is a child of App.jsx. And contact page is also a child of App.jsx. All of these are children, meaning that App.jsx can render them and also still include App.jsx. Well, in line 28, the error element, that is not a child. That is not within the children array of App.jsx. So the not found element is instead of a child of App.jsx, is an entirely new concept that is not in line with app. And that's why when we go to the wrong URL, the entire app disappears, because I'm not rendering a child of the app. I am rendering an adjacent page to the app. And once I go back to about, well, now it gives me app first, and then it gives me the child. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, it does.
Oh, sorry, that was Michael. I apologize. All right, awesome.
So can the error element be defined as a child so that it opens underneath, or?
We can, and I see Will put it in the chat as well. I was trying to avoid that, and we'll do it as an example, but please, if anyone finds this confusing, just pretend like anything that I'm about to say doesn't, I never said it. All right. So you could create an error element within your children, right? Where you specify the path as a catching path. Now, a catching path would mean all. Anything else other than the paths that I specified before would then trigger the element of error or not found. I think that's what I named it. Right. So currently my about page is being triggered, but as soon as I trigger anything different than my about page, it automatically triggers my not found page. Right. And it shows it in this way because it's catching. It's still triggering a path and it's saying, hey, these are the paths that I originally have. And this one is just an extra, this one is just to catch everything else, right? If it's not any of the above, then use this. Okay, so it's not any of the above. It got down to path and it said, oh, well, anything that doesn't match anything above is supposed to trigger this element. And now we just triggered the not found page, making it a child. And that's how we can keep the hello Victor, the home, and the about page. But this is not common practice, and you should not use this for error handling. You should be utilizing the error element. And actually, let me just comment it out.
Why would you say that's not common practice? Wouldn't you want like the user to be able to see everything?
That's a good question. And then that kind of goes into more of a design oriented question than anything, right? Because it kind of depends on the specific task or how it is that you want to handle those errors. What if you have a site where you don't want to expose certain information about your site? Or depending on the page that they go to, maybe it has vital information that only certain users are supposed to be able to see. Well, you don't want to expose any of that altogether. So then you just want to handle it through an error element so that the only thing they can do is whatever you dictate that they can do, which is going back to the homepage. Does that answer your question, Anthony?
Yes, sir. Makes sense.
All right. Any other questions regarding routing? Okay. If there are no questions, I have one final question. What is the main difference, functionally speaking, between an anchor tag and a link tag?
An anchor tag refreshes the whole page, and a link tag just re-renders it.
Perfect. So a link tag will re-render the React DOM, while an anchor tag will refresh the entire browser. Fantastic. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, regarding that, I know earlier you mentioned something about a test suite. And then I don't know if we elaborated on that. Could you elaborate on an example, maybe how that the differences of those two would impact a test potentially?
Yeah, definitely. So let's say that you had to, let's say there's a, for example, or a Rick and Morty API, right? Maybe at some point there's something like, hey, select your favorite characters. And then every time you click on a character that you select to be your favorite, it gets saved into a different page or some sort of use state function that like keeps track of your favorite characters, right? And then, but those are separate pages, right? So I have my all characters page, and then I have my favorite characters page. Well, if I want to see my favorite characters, I need to click on the link or the anchor tag that sends me to see my favorite characters, right? Well, if I utilize an anchor tag, when I click on see my favorite characters, all those favorite characters that I just selected, all that data or that saved state would be gone because I would trigger a refresh in my entire browser, meaning that any state would be set back to its initial value, which would more than likely be an empty array, right? Now, if I utilize a link tag, then it could send me to that page and retain the information without refreshing the entire browser. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's say I have a video store. All right. Okay, if there are no other questions for me, then today we went ahead and we covered what is the React. Oh, look at that. That's why you do an overview at the end. We haven't talked about browser router versus HashRouter. Let's take care of that real quick. All right. So currently we're utilizing a couple of we're utilizing the browser router, and nothing is really going to change throughout our code. The only difference now is going to be that instead of utilizing create browser router, we're going to import create HashRouter. And I just want to show you guys the difference between the two. This is a big source of confusion. So currently right now, browser router, we saw that when we went to homepage, it automatically rendered home, right? And if we do so here, we can see that now it shows us an ampersand. And if I go to about, I have an ampersand and then slash about, and then a contact slash contact, right? Whereas before, when I utilize browser router, and you know what, maybe what I can do. Whereas now, if I utilize browser router, there is no ampersand. If I go to about, there's no ampersand, it just shows me about. And if I go to contact, there's no ampersand and it shows me contact. Well, that's great. And it's pretty simple to understand the difference between hash browser and browser router when it comes to syntactical sugar, right? One of them has an ampersand and the other one doesn't. But what's going on under the hood fundamentally? Well, browser router is what's typically used nowadays, because when you utilize browser router, it's actually making API calls, right? Every time I go to whichever one of these sites it is, right? If I go to about, it's not only triggering my front end, but if I have an attached backend to this that's also sharing the same URL, it's sending that request. It's sending that GET request to both my front end and back end at the same time, simultaneously, to be able to render something on the screen, right? And that's what's happening with browser router. But the moment I change it to hash router, it stops that behavior from happening, because now when I go to about, oh, hello. I am on hash router. Oh, this is all broken. Okay, because now when I go to about, it's actually showing me a ampersand. And this ampersand stops the functionality from being able to send a request to a backend server. And it keeps the request only going to the front end. And that's the key difference between hash router and browser router. Does anyone have any questions about those two?
Yeah, I guess so then would the purpose of having a hash router sometimes be for if you didn't want certain users to be able to access different parts of your backend?
I think the main purpose behind HashRouter is kind of being able to control how many API calls are being sent, right? So for example, if I have my front end and I know my front end is pretty flexible and it's pretty lightweight, and maybe it depends a little bit on request, but not very much, right? Well, then I would probably want to utilize something like HashRouter to make sure that whatever requests are being sent to the backend are being sent when I dictate them. I'm telling my site when those requests are going to be sent and if they need to be sent. Whereas if I utilize something like browser router, as soon as I ping this URL, it's sending that request both to my front end and back end. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but it gives it a part two, if that's okay. The part two would be, so if you would basically always want to have a browser router maybe available so that you could use those, but then in certain instances, you would also have a hash router for link clicking that you wouldn't want to have an API call made for?
So you're asking about being able to integrate the two, about using both HashRouter and BrowserRouter within the same front-end application. You would want to choose one or the other. You wouldn't want to integrate them and get some mixed behavior. What you can do is utilize BrowserRouter and then control the type of request that you're going to respond to or how many you're going to respond to utilizing caching in the backend, which is why BrowserRouter is now the preferred method.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Any other questions? Okay, doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So in overview today, we covered what is React Router DOM, when and why we should utilize the React Router DOM, installing and creating a browser router, connecting our browser router. We just finished discussing browser router versus HashRouter, their purposes. We talked about creating pages that we can attach to our browser router with their individual paths. And we talked about how to handle error pages or error elements. And then we talked about the different types of navigation within the routing, which is a link tag versus an anchor tag. Does anyone have any questions over any of the topics that we covered today? All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.